Hey everybody, it's me, Chris, and today I'm going to do a little bit of a rant. I don't know, maybe this is just a discussion. I'm really terrible at figuring out how to label these things. Fireflower Ouija recently asked me in a video reply to my request for feedback, what are my thoughts on American comic books? Well, actually, more specifically, he asked me, why do I not like them that much? Because I guess in some of my Q&A videos, I've talked about how American comic books typically give me a bit of a bitter feeling where I just do not like them that much in general. So let me repeat that this is going to be a video about comic books in general. This is not everything. Of course, there are exceptions to all rules, but just typically this is how I feel about American comic books. One thing when you take American comic books that you need to remember is that in order to become a successful person in the comic book industry, you need to be hyper dedicated, extremely dedicated. And you also need to remember that comic book artists are not always the most widely accepted profession in our society. And so in order to get into the comic book industry, and this is rather unfortunate, this is not something that I agree with or I'm happy about, you typically need to have a certain type of mindset and a certain kind of personality that, one, does not care about what society thinks of you in this regard, and two, has the dedication necessary to not only obtain the skills, but to beat everybody else out to really get yourself out there, because the comic book market is not that large, and so you really need to be the best. And so the type of personality in our society, our American or Western society, maybe this applies to Europe as well, or Australia, I'm not entirely sure, you need to have a certain specific personality to get there, and everyone in the industry ends up with the same type of personality, which results in comic books that all, even the good ones here, they all kind of read the same, where maybe they don't sound like they're from specifically the same person, but they sound like a group of people that could have all sat at the same lunch table in high school. And really, that's just kind of disappointing. There are so many comic books that make the same type of jokes, the same sorts of referential humor, where maybe it's funny, but the fact that it's repeated so many times in so many different books, it just gets insane. And everyone seems to have the same background in reading the same comic books that have always been around and hyper popular. And so that sort of leads me to my next point. Superheroes. They're everywhere. Every comic book is about superheroes, it seems, or it is a comic book that makes reference to superheroes, or it's a, hey guys, I know you've been growing up with the X-Men and all that other watered down crap. Here's what's really going on, the dark side of superheroes. Or they throw a clever twist and it's the villains, and it's always related to superheroes so often, and that just gets really stale. You don't get enough variety in the things that are good. Of course, there are other topics covered in comic books, but not that often, and typically they do not have very long runs if they do not tie into something that the current main comic book buying market is into. And so in order to appeal to everybody, you kind of need to sort of rehash the same concepts time and time again, and so no one really ever takes the chance to try to reach a broader market. And perhaps that's even the intelligent decision, because maybe in our society a broader market cannot be reached. But yeah, it just sort of creates the same kind of books over and over. It seems like everybody reads each other's stuff, everybody makes references to each other's stuff, and everyone tries to one-up each other, and that just creates a stale world of comic books where, yes, there's some good stuff out there. I have heard of books that perhaps are good that involve superheroes, but sometimes you just want something completely fresh and original. Now, I'm not even really totally against superheroes, but it seems like for the well-developed stories for superheroes that are very long-running, they are just convoluted messes. I really like the concept of X-Men. I really like certain facets of the X-Men. I enjoyed the movies somewhat. Some are kind of bad, but in general, I like the X-Men. I watched the cartoon growing up, and I've actually read quite a bit of different comics of the X-Men. However, reading a comic book in regards to them today is a convoluted mess. It seems like everyone is referencing comic books that were popular in the 70s, which sort of contradict many of the things that are going on today. And that sort of leads me to another point. Everything that's interesting, that is very long running, seems to go through a complete staff change. Now, I'm not trying to say in this particular video that all Japanese comics are better, but with Japanese comic books, typically if something is long running and you find something that is good, it is by the same person, or at least same general pool of people. The artist of One Piece is not going to drop off next week, and the story writer and replacing artist are not going to try to totally shift what One Piece is all about. If you like One Piece, you can rest assured that One Piece is always going to be by the same creative team. That gets really frustrating when you're into something, then you read something else with the same characters and it completely contradicts it. It's just not that great. The story progression in the X-Men, and I'm not just saying the X-Men here, in these Marvel and DC comic books in general typically do this, where they are just convoluted messes that cannot be followed by normal people, and there is no starting point and there's no end point to many of these things. It's just sort of, you have to obtain the knowledge by further research or something. And another thing that I do not like about a lot of American comic books, and this is sort of just become accepted because they were doing this in the 70s and the 80s, and I guess people who grew up reading these comic books got used to this, but I really do not like it when out of nowhere you have one story that completes itself, the next book introduces like an alien race out of nowhere. No one really in the society pays attention to it. There's a big showdown behind it. It turns out someone on this undeveloped team from outer space turns out to be someone's father from the typical cast, and then they go away for 3 years until they're brought back for another 2 issues. And there's a lot of stuff like that just gets really, really annoying. And so perhaps part of my problem here is that I do not know what to buy, but it seems like the things that do have potential, well, they'll get a staff change probably eventually, or they just get cut short. And I really do like a good comic book that I can follow for like the next 10 years or something like that. So those are my thoughts in general on American comic books, and I'm not trying to say that the Eastern comic books, I'm not trying to infer that those are necessarily better in all instances. That's sort of its own little rant, although I will fully admit that I do enjoy Eastern comics in general more than Western. Now, with Eastern comic books, you do not typically get the same kind of colorful art that you find in a lot of Western comic books. Of course, there are pluses to the American comics as well, although sometimes great Japanese art can be found. It's really a case-by-case basis, and there are some positives about the American comic book industry, but that's not what this video is about, and we only have an 11-minute time limit here, so can't really go into everything right now. Those are just some of my general thoughts. It's left me very bitter, and I will say, though, that I have read quite a few different comic books, so I'm not completely uneducated here. It's just that the market is kind of a mess. So let me know what your thoughts are. I'm really interested in hearing opinions on why I'm wrong in this regard. So if you'd like to create an interesting discussion, let me know. Leave a comment, leave a video comment. And you know what? If you want me to do a video on a particular topic that you're interested in, give me a video response or something, because that's always fun to watch. So, as usual, thank you everybody for watching.